Welcome to your deep dive. You sent us some really fascinating material today.
Yeah, it's a breakdown of that recent Joe Rogan Experience episode, the one with Jordan Peterson from April 22nd, 2025.
That's right. Nearly 3 hours of conversation there.
Exactly. And your mission, which you accepted, was basically to slice through all that and pull out the really big insights, maybe some surprising bits too. We're here to guide that.
Okay. And the recap you shared, it flags some key areas for us. There's this pretty radical diet change Peterson talks about and how it supposedly affected his mental health.
Right. And then that really intense discussion on climate change narratives.
Yeah, intense is a good word. Also, the growth of his online platform, Peterson Academy, and then this huge price cut.
Huge is right. Plus some really deep dives into biblical stories, his interpretations.
And circling back again to that price drop because it seems like a major point.
Definitely. So the plan is to unpack all these themes, look for those aha moments,
Connect the dots, basically. Give a clear picture of what really stood out.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start unpacking. The recap kicks off with something very personal for Peterson.
Yeah, his claim that switching to a carnivore diet, we're talking heavy on meat, zero carbs, just completely wiped out his depression after years of dealing with it.
That's a huge claim.
It really is. And he doesn't just mention it casually. He strongly believes it's down to reducing inflammation, that whole gut-brain connection idea.
Right, the gut-brain axis, it's getting more attention.
He presents it as fundamental for him.
And it's interesting, Rogan apparently jumped in right away mentioning other guests, like Dr. Paul Saladino, people who push this kind of diet.
Yeah, so it's clearly something Rogan's heard about before on his show. It has some traction in certain health circles, seems like.
And they touched on something relatable, too, the idea that processed carbs might lead to that feeling of, mental fog.
Exactly. The recap even threw in a listener's story about feeling sharper just by cutting out bread. Makes it feel more tangible.
Sure, and this wasn't just him talking about it privately. The source mentions online chatter, like a Reddit post about his carnivore glow-up.
Ah, glow-up.
Yeah.
Okay, so people notice and we're talking about it.
Seems like it.
Well, it definitely raises that big question about diet and mental health. It's a connection researchers are really digging into.
But it's complex, right? His experience is powerful, but maybe not universal.
Exactly. The science is still evolving, and what works for one person, well, it might not work for another. It's definitely food for thought, though.
Okay, let's shift gears. Big shift here. The climate change debate. The recap called it fiery.
Yeah, that suggests it wasn't just a calm exchange of views. Peterson apparently argued the main narrative isn't really about pure science.
What did he say it was about then?
Control. Control by, and this is his term, power-mad psychopaths.
Wow. Okay, that's strong language.
Very. He frames it as a kind of psychological weapon, something causing eco-anxiety, especially in kids. He criticized what he called doom and gloom scripts.
He actually said it's ideology masquerading as salvation. That quote stood out in the recap.
It's a sharp critique, yeah, suggesting a hidden agenda behind the climate crisis message.
But Rogan pushed back, right. Didn't he bring up the actual data, like rising temperatures, melting ice caps?
He did, which are, key indicators scientists point to.
So how did Peterson respond to that? Did he deny the data?
Not exactly. According to the recap, his point wasn't that the data is fake, but that the response to it is driven by fear.
Ah, okay. Fear and compulsion rather than practical solutions.
That seemed to be his argument. They apparently discussed how this narrative affects behavior and the mental health side, too, that reported 30% jump in youth eco-anxiety since 2020.
That's a concerning statistic, regardless of where you stand on the issue.
Definitely. And the source made it clear this view is really divisive. Reactions on X were split. Some calling him brave, others saying it's just denial.
So it really stirred things up.
No question. It forces you to think about, well, how do we talk about these huge, complex scientific issues? How do you balance informing people with, not causing mass anxiety? And are the proposed solutions the right ones? His perspective really challenges those communication strategies.
Yeah. Okay. Moving to something completely different now. Peterson Academy. His online education thing.
Right. The recap mentioned it hit 40,000 students.
That's a lot of students for an online platform like that.
It is substantial.
Yeah.
And Peterson seems to connect that growth directly to a mission. He thinks traditional universities are, failing to provide truth, as he puts it.
So he's positioning it as an alternative.
Seems that way. And maybe the biggest news here related to growth is the price.
Yeah, I couldn't quite believe this number. It dropped from $599 a year
Oh, yeah.
down to just $3.99 for the whole year.
Right. The recap specifically notes Rogan was pretty stunned by that. And you could see why. How is that even sustainable?
Well, Peterson apparently explained the focus shifted. It's about accessibility now, not profit. And he mentioned getting professors on board who felt pushed out of regular universities because of ideological issues.
Right. The recap said the curriculum is pitched as being free of woke dogma. That's a clear signal about its leanings.
And Rogan apparently wondered if this whole model could actually disrupt higher education, especially with everyone getting used to online learning during the pandemic.
It's a thought. Peterson's quote was something like, "Education should liberate, not indoctrinate." That really sums up his pitch.
And people notice the price online. Lots of positive buzz on X about how cheap it is now.
You can imagine. It basically removes the financial barrier for almost anyone interested.
So it really makes you think about the future of education, doesn't it? Can these alternative tech-driven models really challenge the big institutions, especially when they make themselves this accessible?
It's a huge question. That price point is definitely a disruptive move.
Okay, then the conversation apparently took a spiritual and psychological deep dive into the Bible.
Yeah, looking at stories like Cain and Abel, Moses, Christ, but through a specific lens.
Which is
Voluntary self-sacrifice. He was interpreting these old narratives psychologically.
how so? What were his takes?
Well, like Abel's offering showing wholehearted commitment, maybe responsibility. Moses taking on the people's burden as a kind of leadership sacrifice.
And Christ.
As the ultimate example of transforming suffering into meaning through sacrifice. It sounds pretty intense.
He had that quote too. It's about wrestling with God, our ideals versus our flaws. Gives you a sense of the psychological angle he's taking.
Right. Viewing these ancient texts as mirrors for our own internal struggles.
Did Rogan ask about, like, the practical takeaway? How does this apply day to day?
He did. And Peterson apparently suggested it's about finding purpose in your daily grind, basically.
Yeah.
Trying to turn pain or difficulty into growth. He mentioned his book here too, We Who Wrestle with God.
The recap called it therapy through scripture.
That's a good way to put it. Using these stories for psychological insight.
But the reactions online were mixed on this part.
Yeah, seems so. Some found it really profound, others maybe not so much. Which isn't surprising, really.
True. Interpreting scripture is always going to be personal.
Exactly. His psychological lens is just one way to engage with those stories. It emphasizes self-understanding, personal growth.
Okay, let's swing back to that price drop. Peterson Academy, $3.99 a year. The recap really hammered this home.
Yeah, and Peterson framed it explicitly as a kind of rebellion against elitist education costs. Knowledge shouldn't bankrupt you, was his line.
It's a strong message, and Rogan was still amazed, still asking how they make it work financially.
Understandably. Peterson's explanation pointed to a really lean setup, relying on donations, professors being passionate about it.
Contrasting it with university bloat, as he put it.
Right, a totally different financial model.
And they talked about the context, too, rising university tuition. That stat was pretty stark, up 141% since 2000, reportedly.
Wow. That puts the $3 in sharp perspective.
Rogan brought up the online learning surge post-COVID again, suggesting the timing might be right for something like this.
Makes sense. People are more open to online options now.
And Peterson finished with a call to action, didn't he, for truth seekers to join up.
Yeah, appealing to that specific audience who might feel let down by the mainstream.
The Reddit reactions mentioned were interesting, too, people comparing the tiny fee to massive student loans.
Yeah, that contrast really highlights the appeal. It's education without the crushing debt.
Finally, the conversation looped back to Peterson's health and diet again.
Right, him reiterating the benefits he felt from the carnivore diet.
Depression gone, more energy, mental clarity. He said his mind's sharper than ever.
And he linked it back to inflammation reduction, even mentioning studies about autoimmune relief, trying to give it a physiological basis.
He also made a point about veganism, saying it's not for everyone, acknowledging individual differences.
Which is fair. Rogan also chimed in with his own experiences, right? Less brain fog on meat-heavy diets.
Yeah, so they found some common ground there, based on personal experience at least.
The recap did note Peterson endorses those Paleo Valley meat sticks. A sponsor plug, but tied into his diet story.
Made it seem natural, maybe.
And apparently there was noticeable interest online in his diet tips. People are clearly curious about his results.
So quite a range of topics covered in that one conversation.
Definitely. We've just done a concentrated dive into it all.
No.
From Peterson's personal health stuff with the diet,
To those really pointed challenges on climate science narratives and the education system.
plus the psychological look at biblical stories,
Yeah.
and that massive price cut making his academy super accessible.
So after hearing all this distilled down, what really jumps out to you?
Is it that diet mental health link? Or the whole climate communication debate?
Or maybe the potential shakeup in education, the online platforms, or perhaps the deep dive into those ancient stories.
Or just the sheer boldness of making knowledge that cheap?
Yeah. This deep dive gives you a glimpse into a lot of, well, pretty thought-provoking stuff. Each piece could send you down a rabbit hole.
For sure. Maybe you're now curious about the carnivore diet research or want to read different takes on climate communication.
Or check out some online learning options, or even reread some of those biblical stories thinking about Peterson's psychological angle.
It makes you think, doesn't it? In this flood of information we live in, being able to really engage critically with different ideas, figure out what clicks with you. It's so important.
And maybe ask, what assumptions am I holding that hearing these arguments, especially the challenging ones from Peterson, might make me question?
It's a great final thought.
Well, we hope this was a useful way to get to the heart of that long Rogan-Peterson chat. Thanks for letting us guide your deep dive today.